The letter fell from Jack Morrison's saddlebag when his horse stumbled over a dried riverbed stone, fluttering through the dusty Kansas air like a wounded butterfly before landing at Wade Irving's boots. Wade had been checking his fence line on that scorching August afternoon in 1882, wiping sweat from his brow with a weathered bandana when the sealed envelope caught his eye. He bent down, squinting at the careful cursive writing that spelled out a name and an address in Linden, Kansas. Jack Morrison, General Delivery. Wade knew Morrison, a cattle buyer who passed through town every few months, always loud and boastful at the saloon, always treating the locals like they were beneath him. Something about finding the letter sparked Wade's curiosity, though he knew he should track Morrison down and return it properly. The seal had come loose in the fall, and Wade told himself he was just checking to see if it was important business correspondence that needed urgent delivery. What he found instead made his breath catch in his throat. The letter was written in that same careful hand, feminine and elegant, and it began with words that spoke of loneliness and hope. A woman named Josephine Fletcher from Springfield, Illinois, had written to Morrison after seeing his advertisement in a matrimonial newspaper, one of those publications where men and women seeking marriage partners place their notices. She wrote about her life as a schoolteacher, about losing her parents to influenza 2 years prior, about the emptiness of her small boarding room, and her dreams of building a real home with someone. Her words painted pictures of morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, of children's laughter filling a house, of growing old beside someone who truly saw her. Wade read the letter 3 times standing there in the blazing sun, his cattle forgotten. Josephine's sincerity radiated from every line. She asked thoughtful questions about Morrison's life, his values, his hopes for the future. She confessed her fears about traveling west to marry a stranger, but said her heart told her to take the leap of faith. She wrote about loving the prairie flowers she had seen in illustrations, about wanting to learn to ride horses, about her talent for making fruit preserves and her terrible singing voice that she hoped he would not mind. The letter ended with a gentle question about when he might like her to come to Kansas, if he found her letter agreeable. Wade's jaw clenched as he imagined Morrison receiving this heartfelt correspondence. He had seen how Morrison treated the saloon girls, dismissive and crude. He had heard the man brag about his conquests, about the naive women who responded to his advertisement. Morrison collected their letters like trophies, reading them aloud for laughs while drinking whiskey. The thought of Josephine's genuine words being mocked in that smoke-filled room made Wade's stomach turn. He stood there at the fence line, the letter trembling slightly in his calloused hands, facing a decision that could change everything. The right thing would be to deliver the letter to Morrison at the boarding house where he was staying. The honest thing. But Wade found himself thinking about Josephine's words, about her hope and vulnerability, about how Morrison would crush that gentle spirit without a second thought. He thought about his own loneliness, about the empty ranch house that had once belonged to his parents, about coming home each night to silence and shadows. Wade Irving was 32 years old, lean and weathered from years of working cattle under the Kansas sun. His dark hair was perpetually dusty, his hands scarred from rope and barbed wire, his gray eyes used to scanning horizons. He had loved once before the war, but she had married someone else when he came back changed and quiet. Since then, he had buried himself in building his ranch, in the daily rhythms of livestock and land. He was respected in Linden for his fair dealing and hard work, but he was also alone in ways that sometimes felt like a physical ache. The decision formed in his heart before his mind could fully articulate it. Wade folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his vest pocket, then swung up onto his horse. He did not ride toward Morrison's boarding house. Instead, he headed home, his heart pounding with a mixture of guilt and something that felt dangerously like hope. That evening, he sat at his rough-hewn kitchen table with pen and paper, lamplight casting long shadows across the room. He started the letter half a dozen times, crumpling each attempt. Finally, he wrote simply and honestly, introducing himself as the man who had placed the advertisement, apologizing for the delay in responding. He told her about his ranch, about the work that filled his days, about the beauty of Kansas sunsets that painted the whole sky in shades of crimson and gold. He asked about her teaching, about what books she loved, about whether she truly wanted to come west or if family pressure was pushing her toward marriage. He tried to match the thoughtfulness of her letter, to show her the same respect she had shown in her writing. Wade did not lie about who he was, but he also did not correct her assumption that he was Jack Morrison. He told himself he would explain everything when she arrived, that he would give her the choice to leave if she wanted. Deep down, he knew he was being dishonest, but the alternative, letting her walk unknowingly into Morrison's trap, felt worse. He sealed the letter and rode into town the next morning to post it, his conscience warring with his hope the entire way. 3 weeks passed before her reply arrived. Wade had nearly convinced himself she would not write back, that she had sensed something wrong in his letter. But when the postmaster handed him the envelope with her careful handwriting, his heart leaped. He waited until he was back at the ranch to open it, sitting on his porch in the evening cool. Josephine's second letter was longer than the first, full of delight at his response. She said his questions made her feel truly seen for the first time in years, that most men who responded to such advertisements only wanted to know if she could cook and keep house. She wrote about teaching arithmetic to squirming 8-year-olds, about her favorite novels, about the garden her mother had kept, and how she hoped to plant one of her own someday. She confessed that no one was pushing her toward marriage, that in fact, her aunt thought she was foolish to consider answering an advertisement. But Josephine wrote that she felt something stirring in her heart when she read his letter, a sense that perhaps this was the path meant for her. She asked more questions about his life, about what a typical day looked like, about his family, and how he came to own his ranch. She wanted to know about Lyndon, about the people and the landscape. And at the end of the letter, she wrote that if he was willing, she would like to come to Kansas in October, after the school term ended and before winter made travel too difficult. She said she was nervous but excited, scared but hopeful. She signed the letter, "With warm regards, Josephine." Wade read those closing words over and over. "With warm regards." It was proper and reserved, but he could sense the hope beneath the formality. That night, he began a pattern that would continue through September, writing to Josephine by lamplight after his work was done, learning about her life while sharing pieces of his own. They exchanged letters every 2 weeks, the postal service being what it was, and with each exchange, Wade felt himself falling for a woman he had never met. He told her about losing his parents to a prairie fire when he was 23, about building the ranch from almost nothing, about his 2 horses, Ranger and Belle. He confessed his love of thunderstorms and his terrible cooking skills. He wrote about his best friend Samuel, who ran the mercantile in town, about the church socials and barn dances, about the harsh beauty of Kansas in all its seasons. He asked about her childhood, her dreams, her fears, and Josephine answered every question with an honesty that made him ache. She wrote about her father, who had been a clerk, and her mother, who had played piano beautifully. She described growing up in a small house filled with music and books, about how teaching gave her purpose after her parents died, but also reminded her daily of what she had lost. She admitted she was plain-looking, with brown hair that would not hold a curl and too many freckles across her nose. She said she was taller than most women, nearly 5'8", and hoped that would not disappoint him. She confessed to being clumsy when nervous, to sometimes speaking too bluntly, to loving mathematics in a way her female friends found odd. With each letter, Wade's guilt grew alongside his affection. He knew he should tell her the truth, but the words never made it to paper. He told himself he would explain everything when she arrived, that he would make it right. He convinced himself that he was saving her from Morrison, that his deception was justified. But late at night, staring at the ceiling, he knew he was also being selfish, that he wanted the chance to meet her, to see if the connection he felt through letters could become something real. September passed in a blur of preparation. Wade fixed up the spare bedroom in his house, the one that had belonged to his mother. He whitewashed the walls and built a proper wardrobe, bought a new quilt from Mrs. Henderson in town. He wanted Josephine to have her own space, to feel safe and unpressured when she arrived. He cleaned the entire house from top to bottom, organized his chaotic kitchen, even planted some late-season flowers near the porch. Samuel noticed the changes when he visited one Sunday afternoon. He was a round, cheerful man with a quick laugh and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "You planning to tell me what has you acting like a man preparing for company?" he asked, watching Wade fuss with the curtains in the spare room. Wade had kept the letters secret, but the burden of his deception was wearing on him. He sat Samuel down and told him everything, watching his friend's expression shift from curiosity to concern to outright worry. When Wade finished, Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "Wade, you are walking into a mess of trouble," Samuel finally said. "This woman thinks she is coming to marry Jack Morrison. When she finds out the truth, she will feel tricked, betrayed." "I know," Wade said quietly. "But if I had delivered that letter to Morrison, if I had let her come here thinking he was the man who wrote her those letters, that would have been worse. You know what he is like." Samuel sighed heavily. "I do know, and I understand your heart was in the right place, at least at first. But Wade, you have been writing to her for 2 months now. You have let this go on too long. You should have told her the truth after the first letter." "I will tell her," Wade insisted. "When she gets here, before anything else, I will tell her everything. And I will give her money for the return trip if she wants to leave. I will not trap her here. And if she wants to leave, if she is so angry she cannot stand to look at you," Samuel asked gently. Wade looked away, his jaw tight. "Then at least I will have saved her from Morrison. At least she will be able to go home safe." Samuel studied his friend for a long moment, then shook his head. "I hope you know what you are doing. That woman sounds special, Wade. Do not ruin your chance before it even begins." The 1st of October arrived with crisp mornings and golden afternoons, the prairie grass turning amber under the autumn sun. Josephine's last letter said she would arrive on the afternoon train on October 7th, a Saturday. Wade could barely eat for 3 days before, his stomach in knots. He borrowed Samuel's wagon, wanting something more comfortable than his work wagon for the ride from the station. He bought a bouquet of prairie flowers from a local girl who gathered them, feeling foolish and hopeful at once. On the morning of October 7th, Wade bathed and shaved carefully, put on his best shirt and his good hat. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a man who was both hopeful and terrified, whose whole future hung on how the next few hours unfolded. He had rehearsed what he would say 100 times, but the words felt hollow in his mouth. How did you tell someone you had been lying to them from the beginning, even if your intentions had been good? The train station in Linden was a simple wooden structure with a platform and a small waiting room. Wade arrived an hour early, too nervous to stay at home. He paced the platform, the flowers clutched in his hand, watching the eastern horizon for the first sign of smoke from the approaching train. A few other people waited as well, but Wade barely noticed them. His entire focus was on that empty stretch of track. When the train finally appeared, a dark shape growing larger against the pale sky, Wade's heart began to hammer so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. The locomotive pulled into the station with a squeal of brakes and a hiss of steam, and passengers began to disembark. Wade scanned each face desperately, looking for a woman traveling alone, looking for someone who might be Josephine. Then he saw her. She stepped down from the train car carefully, one gloved hand gripping the railing, a worn carpet bag in her other hand. She was exactly as she had described herself, tall and slender, with brown hair pulled back in a simple bun, wearing a practical gray traveling suit. But she had not mentioned the grace of her movements or the intelligence in her dark eyes as she looked around the platform. She had not told him that freckles would dust her cheeks and nose in a way that made her look both earnest and lovely. She had called herself plain, but Wade thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Josephine's gaze swept the platform, clearly searching for someone. Wade saw the moment of uncertainty cross her face, the slight tightening of her mouth. He forced himself to move forward, his legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. "Miss Fletcher," he said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. She turned to him, and Wade saw relief flood her features. "Mr. Morrison?" she asked, hope and nervousness mingling in her expression. The lie was right there, ready to fall from his lips. He could say yes, could help her into the wagon, could wait until they were at the ranch to tell her the truth. But standing there, looking into her open, trusting face, Wade found he could not do it. "No, madam," he said, his heart sinking. "I am Wade Irving, and I have something very difficult to tell you, something I should have told you 2 months ago." Confusion clouded Josephine's eyes. "I do not understand. Is Mr. Morrison unable to come meet me? Did he send you? Could we talk somewhere more private?" Wade asked, acutely aware of the curious glances from the other people on the platform. "Please, I promise I will explain everything." Josephine hesitated, her hand tightening on her carpet bag. Wade saw her weighing her options, saw the flicker of fear cross her face. She was alone in a strange town with a man she did not know, and he was already confusing her. But something in his expression must have convinced her of his sincerity, because she nodded slowly. "There is a cafe just across the street," she said. "We can talk there." Wade carried her bag and followed her to the small restaurant, his mind racing. They sat at a corner table, and a tired-looking waitress brought them coffee without being asked. Josephine waited, her hands folded on the table, her expression carefully neutral. Wade realized she had probably practiced that look while dealing with difficult students or school board members, a mask of polite attention that gave nothing away. "I found your first letter," Wade began, forcing himself to meet her eyes. "It fell from Jack Morrison's saddlebag back in August. I should have returned it to him immediately, but I read it first, and once I read it, I could not give it to him." Josephine's brow furrowed. "I do not understand. Why not?" "Because Jack Morrison is not a good man," Wade said bluntly. "He advertised for a wife, but not because he wants a partner or a family. He collects responses from women like trophies. He reads them aloud in saloons for entertainment. He treats women, all women, with disrespect and cruelty. If you had come here expecting to marry him, thinking he was the man who wrote you those letters, you would have been walking into a nightmare." The color drained from Josephine's face. "But he did write me letters. I have been corresponding with him for 2 months." "No," Wade said, the word heavy with guilt. "You have been corresponding with me. I wrote you back. I wrote you all those letters. I pretended to be Morrison because I could not stand the thought of him getting his hands on your letter, on your hope. But I should have told you the truth from the beginning. I should have been honest about who I was, and I am sorrier than I can say that I was not." Josephine stared at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. "Excuse me," she said, her voice tight and controlled. She walked quickly toward the back of the cafe, and Wade saw her slip out the rear door into the alley. He sat there, his coffee growing cold, giving her the space she needed. After about 10 minutes, during which he imagined her walking to the station and buying a ticket home, she returned. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her chin was up, and there was steel in her gaze. "Did you lie about anything else?" she asked, sitting back down. "About your ranch, your life?" "No," Wade said immediately. "Everything I told you about myself was true. My name is Wade Irving. I do own a cattle ranch outside Linden. I lost my parents when I was 23. Everything I wrote you was honest, except for my name on those first letters." "Why did you keep writing?" Josephine asked. "After the first letter, you could have told me the truth. You could have explained the situation." Wade took a breath. "Because I am a selfish fool," he said quietly. "Because your letters made me feel less alone than I have felt in years. Because with each letter you sent, I felt like I was getting to know someone extraordinary, someone I did not want to lose. I told myself I was protecting you from Morrison, and that was part of it. But mostly, I was hoping that maybe when you got here you might understand. That you might give me a chance anyway." "You lied to me for 2 months," Josephine said, her voice shaking slightly. "You let me believe I was writing to someone else. You let me travel halfway across the country based on a deception. How am I supposed to trust anything you say now?" "You are not," Wade said simply. "You have no reason to trust me, and I do not blame you if you want to get back on that train and go home. I will pay for your ticket. I will make sure you get safely back to Illinois. But I want you to know that everything I wrote to you about who I am, what I believe, what I hope for, that was all real. The feelings I developed through those letters, those are real too." Josephine looked down at her hands, and Wade saw them trembling slightly. "I do not have a home to go back to," she said quietly. "I gave up my room at the boarding house. The school hired a new teacher to replace me. My aunt made it clear she thought I was making a terrible mistake and does not want me coming back to prove her right. I burned my bridges to come here, Mr. Irving." The guilt Wade felt intensified into something physically painful. "I will help you," he said urgently. "I will pay for you to stay at the hotel here in town while you figure out what you want to do. I will write you letters of reference for teaching positions. I will help you get settled wherever you want to go. This is my fault, and I will do whatever it takes to make it right." "Stop," Josephine said, holding up a hand. "Just stop for a moment and let me think." They sat in silence while Josephine stared at her coffee cup, her brow furrowed in concentration. Wade did not dare speak, did not dare hope. Finally, she looked up at him. "The man who wrote me those letters," she said slowly. "The one who asked about my teaching and my favorite books. The one who told me about thunderstorms and terrible cooking. That was you." "Yes," Wade said. "And you own a ranch outside town. You have a spare room prepared for me." "Yes. I wanted you to have your own space. I wanted you to feel safe, not pressured into anything." Josephine studied his face for a long moment. "I am very angry with you, Mr. Irving. You have every right to be. But I am also practical," she continued. "And I find myself in a difficult position. I have no home to return to, limited funds, and I am in a strange town where I know no one. So here is what I propose. You will take me to your ranch. I will stay in that spare room you mentioned. And I will decide over the next few weeks whether I believe the man who wrote those letters is real or whether he was just another deception. Hope flared in Wade's chest, but he kept his voice level. "And if you decide I am not worth your time, if you want to leave, then you will help me find a teaching position somewhere, or provide me with enough money to start over in a new town. And I will leave and you will let me go without argument. Do we have an agreement?" Wade nodded, not trusting his voice for a moment. Then he said, "We have an agreement, and Miss Fletcher, thank you for giving me any chance at all." "Do not thank me yet," Josephine said, but some of the hardness had left her voice. "You have a lot to prove, Mr. Irving." The ride to the ranch was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. Josephine looked around with clear interest, taking in the rolling prairie, the vast sky, the distant line of trees that marked a creek bed. Wade pointed out landmarks and neighboring ranches, keeping his commentary factual and low-key. He did not want to push, did not want to risk her changing her mind. When they pulled up to his house, Wade saw it through her eyes. It was a simple structure, wood frame with a porch running along the front, solid and well-maintained but hardly grand. The barn was larger than the house, and the whole property spoke of a man who worked hard and lived simply. "It is not much," Wade said, helping her down from the wagon, "but it is sturdy, and the roof does not leak." "It looks like a real home," Josephine said, and Wade heard something wistful in her voice. "May I see inside?" He showed her through the house, pointing out the kitchen with its cast-iron stove, the main room with its simple furniture, and finally the spare bedroom he had prepared. Josephine stood in the doorway, looking at the whitewashed walls, the new quilt, the vase of prairie flowers on the dresser. "You did all this for me?" she asked quietly. "I wanted you to be comfortable," Wade said. "I wanted you to know you would have your own space, that I was not expecting anything from you." Josephine turned to look at him, her expression softer than it had been at the cafe. "The man who wrote those letters would have done this," she said. "That man was thoughtful and kind." "I am that man," Wade said. "I promise you I am." "I hope so, Mr. Irving," Josephine said. "I truly hope so." The first few days were awkward as they learned to navigate sharing a space. Wade kept to his routines, rising before dawn to tend the cattle and horses, coming in for breakfast that he cooked himself, working through the day, returning for dinner. Josephine kept to her room mostly, though she ventured out to explore the house and the immediate surroundings. They were unfailingly polite to each other, but there was a carefulness to their interactions, like two people walking on ice that might crack at any moment. On the fourth day, Wade came in for dinner to find Josephine in the kitchen, a meal laid out on the table. Roasted chicken, potatoes, carrots, and fresh bread that smelled like heaven. He stopped in the doorway, startled. "I could not keep letting you cook," Josephine said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Not when you are working all day and I am doing nothing. Besides, I wanted to see if your claims about your terrible cooking were exaggerated." "They were not," Wade said, moving to wash his hands at the basin. "That looks amazing, Miss Fletcher." "You should call me Josephine," she said. "If we are going to be living under the same roof, even temporarily, formality seems silly." "Then you should call me Wade." They sat down to eat, and the meal was delicious, better than anything Wade had tasted in years. They talked carefully about neutral topics, about the ranch work and the weather, about the books on Wade's shelf that had belonged to his mother. It was not the easy flow of conversation from their letters, but it was a start. Over the following week, a routine developed. Josephine took over the cooking, and Wade noticed she also began tidying the house, organizing his chaotic collection of tools and supplies. She asked questions about the ranch, about the cattle and the land, and Wade found himself explaining his work in detail, pleased that she seemed genuinely interested. In the evenings, they began to sit on the porch together, watching the sunset and talking about their days. Slowly, carefully, the real Wade and the real Josephine began to emerge from behind their walls of caution. Wade told her about his experiences in the war, about the friend he had lost at Shiloh, about coming home changed and struggling to find his place again. Josephine talked about the loneliness of being an orphan, about how teaching gave her purpose but could not fill the emptiness in her heart. They talked about their hopes and fears, about the future they each wanted to build. 2 weeks after Josephine arrived, Samuel came to visit, bringing supplies from the mercantile and his curiosity about how things were going. Wade introduced him to Josephine, and Samuel's warm, easy manner soon had her laughing at his stories about the various characters who lived in Linden. Over coffee and the apple pie Josephine had baked that morning, Samuel regaled them with tales of the recent town council meeting, where Mr. Peterson and Mr. Hayes had nearly come to blows over the location of a new water trough. After Samuel left, Josephine turned to Wade with a thoughtful expression. "He is a good friend to you." "The best," Wade agreed. "He has been trying to keep me from becoming a complete hermit for years." "Did you tell him about the letters, about what you did?" Wade nodded. "Before you arrived. I needed advice, and I needed someone to tell me what a fool I was being." "And did he?" "He did. He also helped me understand why I did it, which was maybe more important." Josephine was quiet for a moment. "Why did you do it, Wade?" "Really?" Wade took a breath, knowing this was important. "At first, I told myself it was just to protect you from Morrison. And that was part of it. But the truth is, I was lonely. I had been lonely for so long I had almost forgotten what it felt like to hope for something more. And your letter, the way you wrote about wanting a real partnership, about building a life together, it woke something up in me. Something I thought had died. So I wrote back, and I kept writing, and with each letter I fell a little more for the woman you revealed yourself to be. It was selfish, and it was wrong to deceive you, but it came from a real place, from wanting something I thought I would never have." Josephine looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "I was lonely too," she finally said. "So lonely, I answered an advertisement from a stranger, which my friends thought was desperate, and my aunt thought was dangerous. But I could not keep living the way I was, teaching other people's children and going home to an empty room every night. When I got your first letter, the one you wrote pretending to be Morrison, it felt like someone finally saw me, not just as a potential housekeeper or a convenient wife, but as a person with thoughts and dreams. That feeling was so powerful, I did not want to let it go. Even now, knowing the truth, I do not want to let it go." "What are you saying?" Wade asked, his heart in his throat. "I am saying that I have been watching you for 2 weeks, Josephine said. "I have seen how hard you work, how carefully you have tried to respect my space and my anger. I have seen you with your animals, patient and kind. I have seen you with your friend, loyal and true. And I am starting to believe that the man who wrote those letters is real, that he is you." Wade felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been tight with anxiety since the moment he found her first letter. "I am him," he said. "I promise you, Josephine. Everything I wrote to you, everything I told you I wanted, it was all real." "Then I think I would like to stay," Josephine said. "Not just for a few weeks while I figure things out, but really stay. I would like to see if what we built through those letters can become something real, something lasting." "Are you sure?" Wade asked. "You do not have to decide now. Take more time." "I am sure," Josephine said, and for the first time since she arrived, she smiled at him without reservation. "I did not come all this way to give up at the first obstacle, even if that obstacle was your own foolish deception." Wade found himself grinning like a boy. "I will spend every day proving I am worth your trust, I swear it." "Good," Josephine said. Because I have high standards, Wade Irving. You have your work cut out for you. The weeks that followed felt like a gift. As October faded into November, Wade and Josephine fell into a partnership that felt both natural and exhilarating. They worked together on the ranch, with Josephine proving surprisingly adept at handling the chickens Wade bought, so she could have fresh eggs, and learning to ride Belle, the gentler of his two horses. She accompanied him on his daily rounds, asking questions about cattle management and land stewardship that showed her quick mind and genuine interest. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, reading aloud to each other or simply talking. Wade taught Josephine to play checkers, and she taught him the card games she had played with her parents. They laughed together over his attempts to improve his cooking and her disastrous first effort at milking a cow. They shared their histories more deeply, the wounds and scars that had shaped them, and found that speaking those painful memories out loud somehow lessened their power. One cold November evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall outside, Wade worked up the courage to take Josephine's hand as they sat on the sofa. She did not pull away, but instead laced her fingers through his, and they sat like that for a long time, watching the fire crackle and feeling the warmth of connection that went beyond physical touch. "I am falling in love with you," Wade said quietly. "I have been falling since that first letter, but now, knowing you as a real person and not just words on a page, it is so much more than I imagined." Josephine turned to look at him, firelight dancing in her eyes. "I am falling in love with you too," she said. "It terrifies me sometimes how much I feel, but it also feels right. Like this is where I was always meant to end up." Wade lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture of reverence and promise. "I want to marry you, Josephine. I want to build the life we wrote about in those letters, but only if you are ready, only if you are sure." "Ask me again at Christmas," Josephine said. "Give us a few more weeks to be certain, but Wade, I already know what my answer will be." The weeks leading up to Christmas were a flurry of preparation and anticipation. Wade took Josephine into town to meet more of the locals, and she was welcomed warmly by the women of Linden who were delighted to have a new schoolteacher in their midst. The current teacher, an elderly woman named Mrs. Carlson, was planning to retire at the end of the school year, and she practically begged Josephine to consider taking her place. Josephine agreed, excited at the prospect of returning to work she loved. Wade and Josephine attended a barn dance together in early December, and Wade felt a fierce pride as he led her around the floor, watching the other men eye her with envy and respect. Josephine wore a blue dress she had made herself, and Wade thought she looked more beautiful than any woman he had ever seen. They danced until their feet hurt, laughing and spinning, and on the ride home, Josephine fell asleep against Wade's shoulder, trusting and peaceful. On Christmas Eve, Wade rode into town and returned with a small box wrapped in brown paper. That evening, with snow falling softly outside and the house warm with firelight and the smell of Josephine's cooking, Wade got down on one knee in front of the Christmas tree they had cut together from the creek bed. "Josephine Fletcher," he said, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. "You came into my life through deception, but you have stayed through truth. You have shown me what it means to be seen and accepted, flaws and all. You have made this house a home and my life full in ways I never dreamed possible. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving every day that I am worthy of the gift of your love?" Josephine was crying, but she was smiling too, and her voice was strong when she answered. "Yes, Wade. Yes, I will marry you." The ring Wade had bought was simple, a gold band with a small ruby, the best he could afford. But when he slipped it on Josephine's finger, she looked at it like it was the most precious thing in the world. And when she kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise, Wade thought his heart might burst from happiness. They were married in the small church in Linden on the first Saturday of January 1883, with Samuel standing up as Wade's best man and Mrs. Henderson, the quilter, serving as Josephine's matron of honor. The church was packed with townspeople who had come to celebrate, and Reverend Shaw performed a simple but heartfelt ceremony. When Wade kissed his bride, the congregation erupted in applause, and Wade felt like the luckiest man alive. The wedding celebration was held at the community hall, with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Wade and Josephine danced the first waltz alone while everyone watched, and then the floor opened up and the party began in earnest. Late in the evening, Samuel pulled Wade aside, grinning from ear to ear. "You did it, you fool," he said, clapping Wade on the back. "You turned your mess into a miracle." "I got lucky," Wade said, watching Josephine laugh with a group of women across the room. "She is more forgiving than I deserve." "She loves you," Samuel said. "Anyone can see that. And you love her. That is all that matters in the end." Wade and Josephine spent their first night as a married couple at the ranch, in the bedroom that had been Wade's alone for so many years. It felt right, bringing Josephine into his space, into his bed, into the most intimate parts of his life. They came together with tenderness and passion, and afterward, lying in the darkness with Josephine curled against his chest, Wade felt a peace he had never known. The winter months were a time of deep contentment. Wade and Josephine settled into married life with surprising ease, their partnership strengthening as they faced the challenges of cold weather and difficult cattle work together. Josephine proved herself capable in ways that surprised the neighboring ranchers, who were used to women staying strictly in the domestic sphere. She could ride fence line as well as any man, treat a sick calf with competence, and still come home to prepare a meal that made Wade's mouth water. In February, Jack Morrison came through Linden again. Wade heard about it from Samuel and knew he had to face the situation head-on. He rode into town and found Morrison at the saloon, holding court with a group of younger men, spinning tales of his exploits. Wade walked up to Morrison's table and waited for the man to notice him. When Morrison finally looked up, Wade saw a flicker of confusion cross his face. "I owe you an explanation," Wade said without preamble. "Last August, a letter meant for you fell from your saddlebag. I found it and I kept it. I answered it myself, pretending to be you. The woman who wrote that letter is now my wife." Morrison's face went through several expressions: confusion, recognition, anger, and finally amusement. "You stole my male bride," he said, laughing. "Which one? I had half a dozen of them writing me." Wade felt his hands clench into fists. "Her name is Josephine, and she was never yours, but I wanted you to hear it from me. I deceived her about who I was, but I would not let her come here thinking you were the man who had written to her with respect and honesty." Morrison leaned back in his chair, grinning. "Respect and honesty. Irving, you are more naive than I thought. These mail-order bride arrangements are just business. She wanted a husband, I was advertising for a wife. If you intercepted that transaction, well, that is your moral problem, not mine." "It is no problem at all," Wade said coldly. "Because Josephine is the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will spend my life being grateful I found her letter. I just wanted you to know what happened, man to man." "Consider me informed," Morrison said, his tone dismissive. "Now, unless you are buying around for the table, I think we are done here." Wade left without another word, feeling like a weight had been lifted. He had faced Morrison, had confessed his deception, and Morrison's callous response only confirmed that Wade had made the right choice all those months ago. Josephine deserved better than a man who saw marriage as a business transaction. When Wade told Josephine about the encounter that evening, she listened quietly and then pulled him into a fierce embrace. "Thank you for telling him," she said. "And thank you for caring enough about a stranger to protect her from a man like that. Even if your methods were questionable, your heart was in the right place." Spring came to Kansas with a rush of green and wildflowers that turned the prairie into a sea of color. Josephine delighted in the transformation, gathering flowers to bring into the house and spending hours exploring the land that was now her home. In April, she began teaching at the school in Linden, taking over Mrs. Carlson's position, and Wade saw her come alive in a new way as she talked about her students and their progress. In May, Josephine missed her monthly courses, and by June, it was clear she was carrying their first child. Wade was overwhelmed with joy and fear in equal measure, terrified of losing her like so many men lost their wives in childbirth, but Josephine faced her pregnancy with calm practicality. She continued teaching until the end of the school year, and then turned her attention to preparing for the baby. Wade found himself building a cradle in the evenings, sanding the wood smooth and carving designs into the headboard. Josephine sewed tiny gowns and blankets, her hands working steadily while they talked about names and the future. They argued playfully about whether the baby would have Wade's gray eyes or Josephine's brown, whether it would inherit her love of books or his affinity for animals. In early February of 1884, during a blizzard that made Wade pace the floor in terror while the midwife worked behind the closed bedroom door, Josephine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him William Thomas Irving, and when Wade held his son for the first time, looking down at the tiny face and feeling the weight of new life in his arms, he wept. "Thank you," he whispered to Josephine, who looked exhausted but radiant. "Thank you for him. Thank you for everything." "We made him together," Josephine said, reaching up to touch Wade's face. "This is our miracle, Wade, the life we wrote about in those letters." William was a content baby, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's stubbornness. Wade would carry him around the ranch, narrating his work to the infant, while Josephine would nurse him in the rocking chair Wade had bought, singing lullabies in her terrible voice that somehow soothed the baby better than anything else. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were harsh winters and dry summers, sick cattle and failed crops. There were times when money was tight and worry kept Wade awake at night. But through it all, Wade and Josephine faced their problems together, their partnership strengthening with each obstacle overcome. In 1886, Josephine gave birth to twin girls, Sarah Jane and Elizabeth Mee, who came into the world screaming their displeasure at having to share space. The house suddenly felt very full and very chaotic, but Wade loved every minute of it. He would sit on the porch in the evenings with a twin on each knee while William played at his feet, and feel a gratitude so profound it was almost painful. Samuel became Uncle Samuel to the children, spoiling them with candy from the mercantile and teaching them songs that made Josephine roll her eyes but laugh nonetheless. The Irving Ranch became known for its hospitality, with neighbors and friends stopping by for meals and conversation, drawn by Josephine's warmth and Wade's steady presence. In 1888, Wade expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Josephine took a break from teaching to focus on their growing family, though she tutored children in the evenings and hosted a reading circle for the women of Linden once a month. She kept up her correspondence with old friends in Illinois, writing long letters about her life in Kansas, about the husband who adored her and the children who filled her days with joy. One evening in the summer of 1889, As they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Josephine turned to Wade with a thoughtful expression. "You ever think about that first letter?" she asked. "About how different things might have been if you had just delivered it to Morrison?" Wade reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together in a gesture that had become second nature over the years. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "About how close we came to never finding each other. It terrifies me." "But you did the brave thing," Josephine said. "The risky thing. You took a chance, even though you knew it might blow up in your face." "I lied to you," Wade said, a confession they had revisited many times over the years, each time with a little less guilt and a little more understanding. "I was not brave. I was selfish and scared and hoping for something I had no right to expect." "You were human," Josephine corrected gently. "And yes, you lied. But you also protected me in your own misguided way. And more importantly, you told me the truth before anything else happened. You gave me the choice to leave. That took courage. And you chose to stay," Wade said, still marveling at that decision. "Even though I had deceived you, even though you had every reason to hate me." "I chose to stay because the man who wrote those letters was real," Josephine said. "Because I saw him in your eyes when you confessed, and because I had come too far to turn back without even trying. But mostly, I stayed because I was already falling in love with you, and I wanted to see where that might lead." "And where did it lead?" Wade asked, though he knew the answer. Josephine gestured to the children, to the house, to the land spreading out around them in the golden evening light. "Here," she said simply. "To everything we dreamed about, to the life we wanted when we wrote those letters, only better because it is real." In 1890, Josephine gave birth to their fourth child, another boy they named Samuel David, in honor of Wade's best friend. Samuel the elder wept when they told him, declaring it the greatest honor of his life. Young Samuel proved to be quieter than his siblings, thoughtful and observant, and Wade saw echoes of himself in the boy. As the children grew, Wade taught them everything he knew about ranching, about reading the weather and respecting the land, about treating animals with kindness and doing work with integrity. Josephine taught them their letters and numbers, instilled in them a love of reading and learning, and made sure they understood the value of education. Together, they raised children who were both capable and curious, tough enough for prairie life but gentle enough to care about others. William, as the eldest, showed a natural aptitude for ranching and declared by the time he was 10 that he would take over the ranch someday. The twins were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into mischief that kept their parents on their toes. Sarah had her mother's organizational skills and her father's stubbornness, while Elizabeth was dreamy and artistic, always sketching the prairie flowers or making up elaborate stories. Young Samuel was the peacemaker, the one who could soothe his siblings' arguments and who showed an early interest in books that delighted his mother. In 1893, when Wade was 43 and Josephine was 35, they were surprised to find themselves expecting again. This pregnancy was harder on Josephine than the others had been, and Wade hovered over her with worry that sometimes annoyed her and sometimes touched her. In March of 1894, she gave birth to their last child, a daughter they named Grace Margaret, who came into the world with a lusty cry and a head full of dark hair. Grace was the baby of the family and was accordingly spoiled by her older siblings, who competed for the privilege of holding her and making her laugh. Wade found himself enchanted by this last daughter, carrying her everywhere in the sling Josephine had made, talking to her about the ranch and the cattle just as he had with William years before. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their children growing up. There were school programs and church socials, barn dances and harvest festivals. There were 4th of July picnics where the whole community gathered, and Christmas mornings full of simple gifts and overwhelming joy. There were losses, too. The death of Wade's beloved horse Ranger. The year a twister took part of the barn. The winter Samuel the elder fell ill with pneumonia and nearly died. Through everything, Wade and Josephine's love deepened and matured. They learned each other's patterns and preferences, developed shorthand communication that let them convey volumes with a glance. They argued sometimes about money or the children or ranch decisions, but they had learned early how to fight fair and make up thoroughly. And every night, no matter how tired they were, they would lie in bed together and talk about their day, maintaining the connection that had started with written letters and grown into something unshakable. In 1900, William turned 16 and took on more responsibility for the ranch, allowing Wade to slow down slightly, to enjoy time with his younger children without the constant pressure of endless work. Josephine returned to teaching part-time, taking on students who needed extra help and loving every minute of it. The twins, at 14, were becoming young women, and Wade found himself simultaneously proud and terrified as young men from neighboring ranches started finding excuses to visit. One evening in the fall of 1900, Wade and Josephine sat on the porch alone, a rare occurrence with 5 children. Grace was spending the night with a school friend, Samuel was reading in his room, and the 3 oldest had gone into town for a dance. The prairie was bathed in the golden light of sunset, and Wade felt a contentment so complete it was almost overwhelming. 18 years, he said, reaching for Josephine's hand. 18 years since you stepped off that train, angry and confused and braver than you knew. Josephine squeezed his hand, her wedding ring catching the light. 18 years since you told me the truth when you could have kept lying, since you gave me the choice to stay or go. Best decision you ever made staying with me, Wade said with a grin. Second best, Josephine corrected, her eyes twinkling. The best decision was answering that advertisement in the first place, even if it went to the wrong man. It went to exactly the right man, Wade said. It just took a little divine intervention to get it there. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Wade thought about that day in August 1882, standing at his fence line with Josephine's letter in his hand, facing the decision that would change everything. He thought about all the moments of doubt and fear, about Josephine's anger and his guilt, about the slow building of trust between them. You ever regret it? He asked quietly. The way we started, the deception. Josephine was quiet for a moment, considering. I regret that you felt you had to lie, she finally said. I regret that we started with dishonesty instead of truth. But do I regret the outcome? Never. I got the life I dreamed about, Wade. I got the partner I wrote about wanting in that first letter. I got love and children and a home where I belong. How could I regret that? I spent years being afraid you would wake up one day and realize you settled, Wade admitted. That you married me because you had no other options, and eventually you would resent me for it. Wade Irving, look at me, Josephine said, waiting until he met her eyes. I chose you. Not once, but over and over, every day for 18 years. I chose you when I decided to stay after you told me the truth. I chose you when I agreed to marry you. I chose you through every hard winter and difficult year. And I choose you now, and I will choose you tomorrow and every day after that. Do you understand? Wade pulled her close, kissing her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. I understand. And I choose you too, Josephine. Every day. Forever. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. In 1902, William married a neighboring rancher's daughter, a practical young woman named Catherine who fit seamlessly into the Irving family. They built a house on the far end of Wade's property, and William took over most of the ranch operations, allowing Wade to truly step back. Wade found he did not mind, that he enjoyed being a mentor rather than the primary worker, and he delighted in watching his son thrive. In 1904, Sarah married a teacher from Topeka, a kind man named Robert who won the family's approval by treating Sarah as an equal partner. Elizabeth shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to attend art school in Chicago, and while Wade was initially reluctant, Josephine convinced him to let their daughter follow her dreams. Young Samuel, true to his early inclinations, decided he wanted to become a lawyer and began studying with a retired judge in Linden. Grace, the baby, grew into a spirited girl who could ride as well as any of her brothers, and who had inherited her mother's sharp mind and her father's stubborn determination. She talked about becoming a doctor, an ambition that was nearly unheard of for women, but that her parents encouraged nonetheless. In 1908, William and Catherine made Wade and Josephine grandparents for the first time, a boy they named Wade Jr. Holding his grandson, seeing the continuation of the family he had built with Josephine, Wade felt the years fall away. He thought about his own parents, about how proud they would have been to see what he had created, the life he had built from dust and determination, and one incredible stroke of luck. As Wade and Josephine moved into their 50s, they began to slow down, to appreciate the quieter moments. Wade still worked the ranch, but with William doing the heavy lifting, he could pick and choose his tasks. Josephine continued her teaching and her reading circle, but she also spent long hours in the garden she had finally established, growing the vegetables and flowers her mother had once tended. They traveled occasionally, taking the train to visit Elizabeth in Chicago and being amazed by the modern city, so different from their prairie home. They attended Samuel's graduation from law school and cried with pride as he gave his speech. They helped plan Sarah's growing family's visits and delighted in their increasing number of grandchildren. But their favorite times were still the quiet evenings on the porch, just the two of them, watching the sun set over the land they had built their life on. They would hold hands and talk about their day, about the children and grandchildren, about memories and hopes. And sometimes they would just sit in silence, needing no words to communicate the depth of their love and gratitude. In the summer of 1912, for their 30th wedding anniversary, Wade surprised Josephine with a trip to Springfield, Illinois, the city she had left behind 3 decades before. They visited the boarding house where she had lived, walked the streets of her childhood, and stood at her parents' graves while Josephine cried and Wade held her. "I wish they could have met you," Josephine said, wiping her eyes. "I wish they could have seen the life we built." "I wish I could have met them too," Wade said. "I wish I could thank them for raising such an extraordinary daughter." On the train ride home, Josephine pulled out a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon. Wade recognized them immediately. His letters to her from those early months of their correspondence. She had kept every one. "I read these sometimes," Josephine admitted. "When I need to remember why I took that leap of faith, these letters showed me who you really were, Wade. They were the truth, even when you were lying about your name." Wade reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his own bundle, her letters to him, including that very first one that had fallen at his feet so many years ago. "I kept mine too," he said. "They remind me of the miracle that brought you into my life, and they remind me to always be worthy of the trust you placed in me." They sat together on the train, reading their old letters, laughing at the formality of those early exchanges and marveling at how much they had revealed even then. By the time they reached Kansas, they were holding hands and looking out at the prairie they both loved, both thinking about the journey that had brought them here. The years that followed were gentle ones. Wade and Josephine watched their children thrive and their grandchildren grow. William proved himself an excellent rancher, expanding the operation and earning respect throughout the county. Sarah became a beloved teacher in Topeka, following in her mother's footsteps. Elizabeth's art began to gain recognition, her prairie landscapes capturing something essential about the beauty of Kansas. Samuel built a successful law practice in Kansas City, fighting for fairness and justice. And Grace, against all odds, was accepted into medical school, determined to become a doctor no matter what obstacles she faced. Wade and Josephine aged gracefully, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with years of sun and laughter. But their love remained as strong as ever, a constant in a changing world. They adapted to new technologies, electricity and automobiles, with amusement and sometimes frustration. But they never lost touch with the simple rhythms of prairie life, the turning of seasons and the importance of community. In 1920, Wade turned 70. The ranch was fully in William's hands now, and Wade spent his days puttering around, fixing things and helping with the grandchildren. He was slower than he had been, his joints stiff with age, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Josephine had not dimmed one bit. Josephine, at 62, still taught occasionally and maintained her reading circle, though she now spent more time with her ever-growing collection of grandchildren. They would come to visit, and she would tell them stories about the old days, about traveling west to marry a man she had never met, about the brave cowboy who told her the truth and won her heart. The grandchildren loved the story, demanding to hear it over and over. Wade would listen from his chair, sometimes adding details, sometimes just smiling at Josephine's animated telling. She always made him sound more heroic than he felt he had been, more certain and brave. But he let her tell it her way, because it was their story, and they had earned the right to shape it as they pleased. One evening in the spring of 1922, Wade and Josephine sat on their porch, now weathered and worn but still solid. The prairie stretched out before them, familiar as their own heartbeats. They were alone, a rare occurrence even now, and they sat in comfortable silence for a long time before Wade spoke. 40 years, he said. 40 years we have been together, Josephine. 40 years since I made the most reckless, foolish, wonderful decision of my life. 40 years since I stepped off that train, angry and scared and hoping for something I could barely articulate, Josephine replied. 40 years since you gave me the truth, even though it cost you. It did not cost me, Wade said. It gained me everything. You, our children, this life. All of it because you were brave enough to forgive a fool who did not know what he had when he found your letter. Josephine reached over and took his hand, her grip still firm despite her age. You knew exactly what you had, she said. That is why you could not let it go. You recognized something precious, even if you went about claiming it in the most backward way possible. Wade laughed, the sound rich and full even after all these years. I suppose that is one way to look at it. They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in the brilliant colors they had watched together for 4 decades. Wade thought about the journey that had brought them here, about the twists of fate and choice that had woven their lives together. He thought about that letter falling at his feet and the decision he made that changed everything. I would do it again, he said suddenly. If I could go back, knowing everything that would happen, I would make the same choice. I would pick up that letter and I would write you back, and I would hope that somehow, some way, you would see past the deception to the truth underneath. And I would choose to stay, Josephine said. Knowing everything that would happen, all the hard years and the beautiful ones, I would choose you. Every time. Always. They sat together until the stars came out, until the prairie was bathed in moonlight and the night air grew cool. Finally, Wade stood and helped Josephine to her feet, and they walked into their house together, hands linked, hearts aligned. In the years that remained to them, Wade and Josephine continued to be partners in every sense of the word. They celebrated the marriages of their grandchildren, met their great-grandchildren, and marveled at how much the world had changed while their love remained constant. They faced the losses that came with age, the death of friends and the aches and pains of aging bodies, but they faced them together, their bond unbreakable. Wade passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1928 at the age of 78, with Josephine beside him. His last words to her were, "Thank you for giving me the life I never dared to dream of." Josephine lived for another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories and imparting wisdom. She never remarried, saying that Wade Irving had been the love of her life and she needed no one else. When she died in the autumn of 1933, at the age of 75, she was buried beside Wade in the small cemetery outside Linden, their headstones side by side, their names linked forever. The story of the cowboy who found a letter meant for another man and answered it himself became a legend in their family, passed down through generations. Their descendants would tell it at family gatherings, at weddings and anniversaries, a reminder that love could spring from the most unlikely beginnings, that courage could look like honesty even when it cost you, and that forgiveness could build something stronger than perfection ever could. The ranch remained in the Irving family, passed down through William's line, and the house Wade had built was maintained with loving care. Visitors could still see the spare bedroom where Josephine had stayed when she first arrived, the porch where Wade and Josephine had spent countless evenings, the land they had worked and loved together. But the real legacy of Wade and Josephine Irving was not in the land or the buildings, or even in the family they created. It was in the story itself, in the reminder that love requires both courage and honesty, that forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves as much as others, and that sometimes the wrong path leads to exactly the right place. Years after their deaths, one of their great-granddaughters found the bundle of original letters in an old trunk, tied with faded ribbon and carefully preserved. She read through them with tears in her eyes, marveling at the intimacy and honesty captured in those pages, at the foundation her great-grandparents had built through words before they ever met face to face. That great-granddaughter, a writer herself, eventually published a book about Wade and Josephine's story, changing the names but keeping the essential truth. It became a modest success, touching readers who saw in their story a reflection of their own hopes and fears about love and connection. The book was dedicated to all the brave fools who risk everything for love, and to the generous hearts who give them a second chance. The Irving family continued to thrive in Kansas, in Linden and the surrounding areas, ranchers and teachers and lawyers and doctors, carrying forward the values Wade and Josephine had instilled. They were known for their integrity, their hard work, and their fierce loyalty to each other. They were known, too, for their love stories, for the way they cherished their partners and built lasting marriages. At family reunions, the oldest members would tell the story of Wade and Josephine to the youngest, ensuring that each new generation understood where they came from. They would talk about the letter that fell at Wade's feet, about his risky decision to answer it himself, about Josephine's journey west and her anger when she learned the truth. They would talk about forgiveness and partnership, about building a life together through work and love and unwavering commitment. And always, the story ended the same way, with the reminder that Wade and Josephine had lived out every dream they had written about in those early letters. They had built a home together, raised children who thrived, created a legacy that extended far beyond their own lives. They had loved each other deeply and faithfully for 46 years. From that moment, Wade told Josephine the truth on the train platform until Wade's last breath in their shared bed. The prairie wind still blew across the land where Wade and Josephine had built their life, where they had laughed and argued and worked and loved. The sun still set in brilliant colors over the horizon, painting the sky just as it had when they sat on their porch together. And if you knew where to look, if you visited the small cemetery outside Linden, Kansas, you could find their graves side by side, the stones weathered but the names still clear. Wade Irving and Josephine Irving, beloved husband and wife, together in life and death. Their story was not one of perfect people making perfect choices. It was a story of flawed humans who found each other through an unlikely combination of chance and choice, who built something lasting from an imperfect beginning. It was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that love is not about grand gestures or perfect moments, but about choosing each other every day, about forgiveness and growth and partnership. The legacy of that single letter, falling at Wade's feet on a dusty August afternoon in 1882, rippled out through time, affecting not just Wade and Josephine but their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, touching lives in ways neither could have imagined when they wrote those first tentative words to each other. It was a testament to the power of written words, of honest communication, of taking risks for connection. And so the story lived on, generation after generation, a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful journeys begin with a single step taken in fear and hope, and that love, true love, can grow from the most unexpected seeds into something that lasts not just a lifetime, but forever.